The first cold snap of autumn had come down out of the hills overnight, and by the time the Milford Crossroads Market opened its gates at sunrise, every merchant along the row was stomping feeling back into his feet and blowing clouds of breath into the gray morning air. Canvas walls snapped in the wind. Lanterns swayed on their hooks. The smell of wood smoke and roasting grain drifted from the cookfire at the market's eastern end, and somewhere near the livestock pens, a rooster announced his displeasure at the season. Corwin Aldred had been awake since before dawn. He always was on market mornings. It was his ritual, the careful unwrapping of the needles from their oilcloth sleeve, the arrangement of spools by color along the front board of his stall, the threading of the 3 working needles he'd need before the light was good enough to thread more. He set out his shears, his chalk, his small pot of beeswax for the difficult threads. He spread the bolt of deep blue wool across the back board, not because he expected to sell much of it today, but because the color caught the eye from 3 stalls away and brought people in to look. He had learned that 30 years ago from his wife, Elsa. She had an eye for display that he had never fully matched, but he tried every market morning, and he thought she would have approved of the blue. His wagon stood at the end of the row, not the prime spot, which went to the grain merchant who paid the gate fee 3 months in advance, but a decent spot, close enough to the foot traffic coming in from the North Road, and sheltered on one side by the wheelwright's canvas. Corwin had worked this market circuit for 11 years since Elsa died, and the house in Purton had begun to feel less like a home and more like a room where he happened to sleep. The wagon suited him. The road suited him. He had his needles and his thread and his knowledge, and people always needed mending. He poured himself a cup of tea from the small iron pot he kept on the brazier at the back of the stall, and he waited for the market to wake up. By mid-morning the crossroads was full, a good crowd for the season. A family from the eastern farms came and went, and he reattached 2 buttons on the father's coat and shortened the sleeves on a boy's jacket, while the mother browsed the bolt goods. A soldier's widow from the hill garrison brought him a dress uniform jacket that needed the rank insignia restitched, delicate work, the kind other menders charged double for. Corwin charged her what it was worth and no more, and she looked at him with the particular gratitude of someone who'd been overcharged before and hadn't forgotten it. He was finishing the last stitch on the jacket when he heard it. It was not a loud sound. It was, if anything, the opposite, a silence that moved through the market like a cold front, stall by stall, as the crowd's ordinary noise pulled back from a point near the northern gate and left a hush in its wake. Corwin looked up. She was tall. That was the first thing. She stood nearly a full head above the tallest man in the row, and she moved with the kind of deliberate, measured step of someone who had learned long ago to give the world around her a moment to rearrange itself before she walked into it. She was an Orc woman, green-skinned, strong-shouldered, with 2 small tusks curving up from her lower jaw, and her dark hair braided close to her head in a dozen tight plaits, each one tied at the end with a plain strip of leather. Her face was not young, but it was not old either, somewhere in the middle years, with the kind of weathered steadiness that came from a life spent out of doors, and the kind of expression that said, plainly, that she had been stared at before and had decided some years ago that it was other people's problem. She wore road clothes. That was the word for them, road clothes, the kind of garments that had started their life as something decent and spent the last season being worn every day across every kind of terrain. A long coat in heathered gray, the hem muddy and the left shoulder seam giving way at the back. Heavy trousers, dust-colored. Boots that had been oiled within the last week but were beginning to show the road again already. A belt with a number of small pouches hanging from it, each one tied with a different color of cord. She walked slowly down the row. The market did not exactly part for her. It was more that it contracted. The nearest stall keepers found suddenly interesting things to do at the backs of their stalls. A pair of farmwives drifted a few feet to the left. A child pointed and was quickly redirected by her father. An apple seller who had been doing good business for the past hour looked at the approaching figure, then looked away, then looked again, then turned his back and began rearranging apples that were already arranged. She passed the bolt goods stall without stopping. She passed the ironmonger and the leather worker and the woman who sold candles and soap. She paused once, briefly, in front of a stall selling dried herbs and roots. She leaned in and looked at the merchandise with a focused, professional attention, then straightened again and moved on without buying anything. She was nearly at the end of the row when she stopped in front of Corwin's stall. He had gone back to his stitching. This was not a performance of disinterest. It was simply that the jacket sleeve needed finishing, and it would not finish itself. He was a man who finished things. "You do mending," she said. Her voice was lower than he'd expected, not harsh, but resonant, the way a note from a larger instrument sits beneath the others in a chord and makes everything richer without calling attention to itself. Corwin set down the jacket and looked up at her directly. "I do," he said. "All kinds. Come closer and let me see what you've got." She looked at him for a moment, a quick, assessing look that he recognized, because people who had been turned away a lot developed that look, the involuntary brace before the no. Then she stepped up to the board and turned slightly to show him the shoulder seam. He leaned in. The seam had given way about 4 inches, starting from the shoulder point and running toward the collar. The fabric was good quality, heavy wool linen blend, the kind that lasted for years if it was cared for, but it had been mended before at this same spot, by someone who had used the wrong weight of thread and put the stitches too close together. When the seam gave way this time, it had taken a small triangle of the original fabric with it, leaving a gap that was going to need a careful patch if it was going to sit right. "How long has it been like this?" he asked. "Since the mountain pass above Cresthelloe," she said. 3 weeks. He nodded. 3 weeks of a shoulder seam pulling open on every step, and she hadn't been able to get it fixed, which meant every mender between Cresthelloe and here had turned her away, or she hadn't tried, or she decided it wasn't worth the particular kind of unpleasantness that standing at a stranger's stall sometimes cost her. He suspected the first. "I can fix it," he said, "properly, not a patch and pray. There's a way to do it with a small insert of matching fabric so the shoulder sits true and the seam doesn't pull again. It'll take about half an hour." She looked at the coat, then at him. "What do you charge?" He told her. It was a fair price, what the work was worth, what any other competent mender in the market ought to have charged. It was not a special price for an Orc woman, discounted out of excessive charity. It was not an inflated price set by someone who knew she had no other options. It was the price. She reached into one of the pouches on her belt without any visible reaction. No relief, no suspicion, no gratitude performed for his benefit, and counted out the coins into her palm. "Half now," she said, "half when I collect it. That's how I do it." "That works for me," Corwin said. She set the first half of the coins on the board, and she shrugged the coat off her shoulders. Beneath it she wore a heavy canvas vest over a woolen shirt, both travel-worn but whole, and she bore the loss of the coat into the morning chill with perfect equanimity. "I'll walk," she said, "an hour." "Half an hour should do it," he said. "But take your time, I'm here until the 3rd bell." She nodded once, and she walked back into the market. Corwin sat down on his work stool and spread the coat across his board and looked at it properly. Up close the fabric was even better quality than he'd thought, a mountain-weight wool linen with a small herringbone woven into it, the kind of cloth that was expensive when it was new and became more valuable with time because it only grew denser. The color had faded somewhat from the road, but the hand of it was excellent. The previous mending, those tight, wrong-weight stitches, told him something. That whoever had done it had been in a hurry, or hadn't cared, or both. He would take his time. He threaded a needle with the closest match he had to the coat's faded gray, not the gray on the spool, which was too bright, but the gray he mixed by using a strand of the faded brown alongside it, a trick Elsa had shown him that he still used 20 years later. He cut a small piece of matching fabric from the selvage he kept for exactly this kind of repair, eased it into the gap left by the torn original, and began. He was so absorbed in the work that he didn't notice the two women from the soap and candle stall, watching him from across the row. "You're really going to fix her coat," one of them said. He had heard this tone before, not quite hostile, not quite mocking, somewhere in the middle. "I fix coats," Corwin said without looking up. "It's what I'm here for." There was a pause. "She's an orc," the other woman said, as though this might be new information. "I noticed," he said. "It's a good coat. Be a shame to leave the seam open all winter." He heard them move away. He kept stitching. The work took him 40 minutes, not 30, because he decided partway through that the collar lining was also beginning to detach on the left side, and it would separate entirely by the first real snow if it was left. He took the extra time to reattach it, and he used the small overcast stitch at the edge that prevented the lining from curling, and when he was done, he held the coat up in the morning light and looked at it from arm's length. It was good work. The shoulder sat correctly. The seam was flat and would not pull again for years. The repair was visible if you knew where to look, but it was honest. The way a mended thing was honest when it was mended by someone who respected it. He folded it carefully and set it on the board. She came back in 45 minutes, not 30. She walked to the stall and he unfolded the coat and handed it across the board. She turned it to the shoulder and looked at the repair without touching it for a moment. Just looked at it with that same professional attention she'd given to the herb stall, and then she ran her thumb along the seam. "You used a composite thread," she said. It was not a question. He looked at her. "You know thread." "I know repair," she said. "You mix the grays." "Old trick," he said. She looked at the coat for another moment, then she looked at him. "You also did the collar," she said. "It was going," he said. "Didn't seem right to leave it." She didn't say anything to that. She reached into her pouch and counted out the second half of the coins and set them on the board. Then she put the coat on and she settled it onto her shoulders, and he could see her feel the difference. The way the seam sat correctly now, not tugging, not shifting, just holding the way it was meant to. "Thank you," she said. "You're welcome," he said. She walked away down the row, back toward the north gate, and Corwin poured himself another cup of tea and watched the market settle back into its ordinary noise around the space she had left. The next morning she was back. He saw her before she reached the stall. She was easy to spot, even in a crowd, and she was moving with the same measured step, but this time she was carrying something. A pair of trousers folded over her arm. Riding trousers, cut for function over form, with a long split along the left inseam that someone had attempted to repair with a running stitch too loose to hold. "The running stitch won't hold," she said by way of greeting. "No," he agreed. "Sit down," he said, studying it. "The inseam on riding trousers takes too much strain for a running stitch. You need a flat fell. Can you do it this morning?" He moved a small basket of remnants off the second stool behind the board. "Sit down if you like," he said. "I'll have it done in 20 minutes." She looked at the stool, then at the busy market around them, then back at him. Then she came around the board and sat. He began on the inseam. The market moved around them. People came and went, browsed his bolts and his notions. A young man bought 3 spools of the good linen thread and a paper of pins. Corwin worked and Marath sat, and neither of them felt the need to fill the silence immediately, which told him something about her. He had been at this long enough to know that how people handled the quiet when they were waiting for something to be fixed was a reliable measure of character. Some people filled every second, talking about the weather or the prices or their children's progress in school, needing the sound of their own voice to know the time was passing. Some people were watchful and restless, their eyes moving from object to object without quite settling, as though they were waiting for something to go wrong. Some, the rarest kind, settled into the silence the way a careful person settles into a chair, without wasted motion, at ease with the fact that the thing they'd come for was being done, and the doing of it was enough. She was the last kind. He had met perhaps a dozen people in 30 years of this work who were that kind. Elsa had been one of them. He had always thought it was a sign of a person who lived mostly in attention rather than in anticipation, who was here, properly, rather than already on to the next thing. After a few minutes she spoke. "The herb stall at the south end," she said. "How long has he been at this market?" "Rudwick, 2 seasons now," Corwin said. "Before that it was a woman from Salter's Crossing who did better stock but worse prices." "Why?" "His dried yarrow is 3 months old," she said. "It'll have lost half its properties." He glanced up at her. "Are you a healer?" "Among other things," she said. He nodded and returned to the seam. "There's a woman on the hill road, 2 miles north of here, who grows yarrow fresh through the first frost. Name of Bram. She doesn't come to market, but she sells from the house." Marath was quiet for a moment. "Thank you," she said. "She also does a good feverfew," he added, "and her chamomile is the best I've had." A brief pause. "How do you know chamomile?" she said. "My wife was the one who knew herbs," he said. "I picked up the edges of it, enough to know good from middling." He set the flatfell and smoothed it. "She died 11 years ago. I still buy chamomile from anyone who grows it well out of habit." He looked up once briefly. "It keeps well enough in a small tin." Marath said nothing for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice had the same even register, but something in it was slightly more present. "Chamomile keeps better than people think," she said, "if it's dried at the right stage and sealed properly." "She kept it in a dark corner of the pantry," he said. "Said light was the enemy." "She was right," Marath said. He finished the flatfell in silence and pressed it smooth against the board with the side of his palm. Then he held the trousers up to the light to check the line. He had the inseam flat-felled and pressed flat against the board inside of 25 minutes. She ran her thumb along it, same as she'd done with the shoulder seam. "You do good work," she said. "I do fair work," he said. "On good material it looks better than it is." She looked at him steadily for a moment as though she was deciding something. Then, "Marath," she said. "Corwin," he said. They did not shake hands. His were still holding the trousers. But there was a small nod exchanged across the board that meant roughly the same thing. She paid him. She left. He watched her go, and he noticed, absently, the way you notice things that had been true for a while before you named them, that the market around the stall had been quieter than usual this morning. Not hostile, exactly. Watchful. He served the next customer, and didn't think about it further. The third morning she came back with a winter cloak. It was, without question, the finest piece of clothing she owned. That was obvious even in its current state, which was badly in need of attention. The cloak was deep green, the green of old forest, the kind of green that didn't come from a common dye but from something more deliberate and costly, and its fabric was a dense, heavy weave with a slight sheen to it that spoke of quality more eloquently than any price tag. It had a hood that fell in clean, deep folds when properly arranged. It had been edged along the hem, and the collar with a narrow band of copper-colored cord, or it had been once. The cord was coming away along the entire right side, the stitching that held it frayed by what looked like years of hard use, and the hem itself had been trodden on enough times that it had separated from the body of the cloak in 3 places. She put it on the board without preamble. "This is more complicated," Corwin said. "I know," she said. He spread the cloak across the full width of his board and looked at it carefully. The cord edging was the main problem. You couldn't simply restitch it where it had come away, because the thread holes from the original stitching had widened with the fraying, and if you stitched it back in the same line, the thread would pull through again within a season. You had to take the cord all the way off, reset the hem edge, and reattach the cord along a fresh line of fabric. On a cloak this size, that was the better part of a day's work. The hem separations were simpler but needed to be done first, and they needed to be done with the heavy curved needle, because the cloak's weave was dense enough to resist a straight one. "I can have it done by tomorrow morning," he said. "The cord needs to be fully reset. I'll need to keep it overnight." She nodded. "What do you charge for that?" He named the price. It was, again, the fair price, not cheap, because the work was not cheap, but not the opportunistic price that someone might have named for a piece of clothing this clearly valuable. He watched her face as he said it, out of the habit of watching faces, and what he saw was nothing. No relief, no assessment of whether she was being taken advantage of. She had decided, he thought, that he wasn't the kind of man who did that. He found he was glad she thought so. "The cord," she said. "What will you use to reattach it?" "Wax silk," he said. "The same weight as the original. I have it in copper." She nodded. "Then, there's a reinforcing stitch used in clan dress," she said. "At the corner points. It looks like a small knot, but it works against pull-through." He looked at her. "Can you show me?" She reached across the board and pointed at the collar corner of the cloak, where the cord and the hem edge met. "The original stitch should be here," she said. 4 threads crossed. They've come out, but you can see the shadow of them in the fabric. He leaned in and looked. He could see it, a faint ghost in the weave where something had been worked in and then slowly worn away. It was a clever stitch. He recognized the principle, though not the exact execution. "I've seen something similar in mountain region work," he said. "Not quite the same." "It's an old clan technique," she said. "The crossing pattern is different." "If you have a moment," he said, "I'd be glad to know it correctly." She took the piece of scrap cloth he offered and the needle he threaded, and she worked the corner stitch twice, slowly, so he could see it clearly. He watched her hands. They were a healer's hands, he thought, very still when they needed to be, and very precise. And they handled the needle with the ease of someone who had done fine work before, though not this kind of fine work. "The crossing has to go twice through the back layer," she said. "Not once. That's what holds it." He nodded slowly. "I'll use it at all 4 corner points," he said, "if that's all right." "It's what it's meant for," she said. She left the cloak and walked away. Corwin spent the rest of the morning on it between customers, and when the market closed at the second bell, he sat behind the closed canvas flap of his stall with his lantern, and worked the hem separations with the curved needle, and then began the long, careful work of lifting the copper cord away from the right side of the cloak, section by section, like peeling away something damaged so the healthy thing beneath it could be properly reached. He worked until the light through the canvas had gone completely dark. It was late in the evening when he finished the first half, the hem, the right side cord fully off and the edge of the fabric reset and pressed flat, and he set the cloak aside carefully and lay down on the narrow cot at the back of his wagon. The market was quiet. Somewhere a dog was barking in the distance. The wind had dropped. He lay on his back and looked at the wagon's low ceiling and thought about the crossing stitch, which was elegant. He thought about the word clan, which she had said with a naturalness that suggested it was simply what it was, her people, her place, as ordinary as his would have said village or town. He thought about the way she had watched the market all morning with that careful attention that didn't miss things. He thought about the cloak. This was, he recognized, a particular kind of thinking, the kind he did when he'd been given work that mattered and wanted to do it right. It was not worrying. It was more like planning, except that the plans were small and specific. The order of operations in the morning, the tension to use on the waxed silk when the cord was being reattached along the reset edge, whether there was a way to work the crossing stitches at the long mid-points of the cord run that would be less visible from the front while still holding as firmly as the corner ones. There probably was. He thought about it for a while. He decided to use a slightly longer interval in the crossing on the mid-points, which would make the stitch sit flatter against the cord and be almost invisible from the right side of the fabric while losing nothing in holding strength. He was fairly certain this would work. He thought about Elsa, who had also been the kind of person who didn't miss things, who had the particular gift of paying full attention to whatever was in front of her, which made being in front of her feel like being properly seen. He had not thought about Elsa in a comparatively way for a long time. He noticed it was not painful exactly. He fell asleep. In the morning he finished the cloak. He reset the copper cord along the fresh fabric line, using the waxed silk in the copper thread and the crossing stitch at every corner point, and at the midpoints of each long run, not just the 4 structural corners but 6 additional points where the cord would take strain, because it was the right thing to do and the cloak was worth it. He pressed every section flat as he went. When he was done, he hung the cloak on the hook at the back of the stall and stepped back and looked at it in the morning light, before the market opened. The cord lay true and clean. The hem sat properly, close to the ground all the way around. The green of the fabric in the morning light coming through the canvas was remarkable, a deep, serious color, the color of a forest scene from a height. It was a beautiful cloak. He was still looking at it when the market opened, and he left it hanging on the hook because it drew the eye and because he wanted it to be the first thing she saw when she came in. She arrived mid-morning. She was wearing the mended trousers and the repaired coat, and she walked to his stall with the same measured step. She stopped when she saw the cloak on the hook. She was still for a moment. Then she came up to the board and took the cloak down and spread it across the board and looked at it, and Corwin watched her run her thumb along the copper cord the way she always ran her thumb along his repairs, that professional, testing motion, and he watched her find the corner stitches and pause there. "You use the crossing stitch," she said. "At every stress point," he said, "not just the corners." She turned the cloak over and looked at the back of the hem line. She put it back right side out. She looked at it for another moment. Then she put it on. She settled it on her shoulders, and it fell to the correct length, just above the ground in a clean, unbroken line. The hood settled into its proper folds at the back. The copper cord lay flat and even all the way from collar to hem on both sides, and the morning light caught the slight sheen of the deep green fabric, and for a moment Corwin had a clear, uncomplicated sense of what the cloak was supposed to look like, and had at some point, long ago, actually looked like. She was still standing in the cloak when she paid him, and she did not take it off to fold it and carry it. She wore it. She stood at his board for a moment after the coins were exchanged, and he thought she was about to leave. But she didn't. She looked at him with a directness that was different from the assessing look she'd had on the first morning, not testing, just present. "Why do you come to this market?" she said. "There are larger ones. The Westfield Fair would get you 3 times the foot traffic." "I've been to Westfield," he said. "It's a good fair. But I've been doing this circuit for 11 years and the Milford Market is where I know people. The widow Tessara brings me her husband's clothes every autumn. He passed 3 years ago and she hasn't parted with them, but she doesn't want them to fall apart either. Old Grundy at the North End has a boy who's growing 2 inches a year and needs everything let out. It matters to know people." She was quiet for a moment. "My people are passing through this region," she said. "In about a week. There are 40 of us plus the camp workers. We're heading north for the winter grounds." He nodded, uncertain where this was going. "They could use work," she said. "Mending. Some of it is complicated. Clan dress uses some techniques the market menders don't know." "I know the crossing stitch now," he said. A small expression crossed her face. Not quite a smile, more like the interior equivalent of a smile, the thing that happened just before one. "You do," she said. "Tell them I'm here," he said. "Tell them what I charge. If they come, I'll do the work right." She nodded. Then, "You don't ask questions," she said. It was an observation, not a complaint. "I ask about the work," he said. "The rest isn't my business." She looked at him for another moment, with that full attention. Then she turned and walked back into the market, and the green cloak moved with her the way a well-made cloak moves when it is properly worn, with weight and purpose, settling around her like something that knew where it belonged. Corwin watched her go. He did not see her for the rest of the third day, and that evening, after the market closed, he found himself thinking about the crossing stitch again, working it on a scrap of cloth until he could do it without looking at his hands. He also thought about 40 people and a week's worth of mending. He took out his supply ledger and did some quiet arithmetic. The fourth morning was clear and cold, the first real cold of the season, with a sky the particular pale blue that came after the temperature had dropped overnight and the air had gone still and dry. The market opened slow, fewer people willing to leave a warm hearth for a cold market, and the ones who came went faster, their breath puffing in the air. Corwin had his stall open and his needles threaded, and his tea made by the time the first customers came through the gate. He served a farmer's wife with a dress that needed the waistline taken in. He sold 3 yards of flannel to a man building a winter jacket. He resoled the heel liner on a boot that someone had brought in desperation, it being primarily a cobbling job but not entirely beyond his competence. The second bell of the morning rang, and then the gate at the north end of the market opened. Not the ordinary opening. The gate was wide to begin with, but it was opened fully now. Both sections swung back, and through it came not a crowd exactly but a procession. 2 by 2, and then 3 by 3 as the lane inside the market widened, they came in. Tall figures in the warm morning light, green-skinned, braided, wearing clothes that were not road clothes. They were dressed in the colors that Corwin would later learn were the Stoneback clan's formal traveling dress, deep greens and warm browns, and threaded throughout, the copper color he had spent half a night reattaching to the hem of a cloak. There were, he would count later, 47 of them. They walked in with the easy, measured pace of people who were accustomed to arriving places together and had long ago stopped being uncertain about whether they were welcome. A few of the market's regulars fell back. One of the stall keepers at the near end lowered his canvas flap. Corwin noted which one, without surprise. A woman with a basket of bread had stopped completely in the center of the lane and was simply watching, bread basket held in both hands, her face showing not fear exactly, but the particular arrested attention of someone seeing something they had not seen before and did not yet have a name for. The Stoneback clan moved through all of this without altering their pace in the slightest. The procession came down the center of the row and stopped about 20 feet from Corwin's stall, and then it reorganized itself, not with any audible command, but with the fluency of a group that had done this many times, and a figure came forward through the center of it. Marath walked differently than she had on the 3 previous mornings. She walked the same in that her step had not changed. It was the same measured, deliberate pace, the same quality of not rushing and not apologizing for the space she took up. But she was wearing the green cloak. The hood was down, her braids fully visible, and each one of them was now dressed differently than they had been. The plain leather ties had been replaced by small toggles of bone and amber and polished river stone, each one a warm color in the morning light, and the braids themselves had been arranged with a formality he had not seen before. Beneath the cloak she wore a long tunic and sash in the same deep green as the cloak, with copper thread embroidery at the collar and cuffs. At her belt, the pouches were still there, but they were arranged differently now, with a deliberateness that he recognized, without being able to name, as the difference between a tool carried for use and a tool carried as a mark of office. She walked up to his stall. Behind her, the market had gone extremely quiet. "Corwin Aldred," she said, and his name and her voice in that stillness was a particular thing, it had weight, which was how he knew this was a formal moment, and warmth, which was how he knew it was also a true one. "Marath," he said. She put both hands on the board, not leaning, just resting them there. a gesture he did not recognize, but that felt like a greeting between equals. "I want to tell you something," she said, "in front of this market because this market should know it." He waited. "I am the head healer of the Stoneback clan," she said, in a voice that was not raised but that carried, because she had a voice that did not need to be raised to carry. "I have been traveling the roads between here and Crestalo for 3 weeks, looking at how the villages and markets in this region treat those who are not from here. Specifically, those who look like me." She paused. "At 4 markets before this one, no one would repair my clothes. At 2 of them I was asked to leave." The market was very still. "At this market," she said, "a tailor named Corwin Aldred looked at my coat, told me what the repair required, and charged me a fair price for the work. He did the same for a pair of trousers and for this cloak." She touched the copper cord at the hem, the cord he had reset, the stitches she had watched him make. He did this without changing his manner or his price or the quality of his work. He asked about the work. "Nothing else." She straightened slightly. "The Stoneback clan will be in this region for the winter," she said. "We will trade here. We will bring healing services and herb knowledge and craftwork. We will treat this market well." A pause. "We expect to be treated well in return. A man named Corwin Aldred has shown us what that looks like." Corwin was aware of a number of things simultaneously. That his tea had gone cold, that the wheelwright in the stall next door had come out from behind his canvas and was standing very still, that the apple seller, who had turned his back 3 mornings ago, was now looking at the ground in a way that suggested he had some feelings about that choice, and that 47 orc warriors were standing in a frontier crossroads market on a cold autumn morning, calm and orderly, and paying full attention to their healer, who was looking at him across his mending board. He became aware that he should say something. "I'm glad the cloak came out right," he said. This was, apparently, the correct thing to say, because Marath's expression shifted into the full version of the thing that had been its interior equivalent before, an actual smile, small and specific, that changed the whole register of her face. Behind her, someone in the procession laughed, brief and warm, and the sound broke the stillness into something easier. "I have a formal commission to offer," she said. "Winter is coming and my people's clan dress needs attention, 47 people's worth. Some of it requires techniques that you have now been taught the beginning of." She raised an eyebrow slightly. "There is more to learn." "There usually is," he said. "The Stoneback clan will pay well," she said. "The work would take you through the winter. We have space at the winter camp, good shelter, a proper workspace." She paused. "Better than a canvas stall in the cold." He looked at her for a moment. He thought about the house in Purton that he did not go home to, and the wagon that suited him fine, and the road that suited him, and the way the cold had come down out of the hills last night and would only get colder. "What kind of techniques?" he said. "More crossing stitches," she said. "Different weights. There are also the clan knot joins. Those take a week to learn, but they last a generation. And there is a kind of invisible mending used in ceremonial dress that I have never seen a market tailor know." "I'll learn it," he said, without any particular drama, because it was simply true. She nodded, as though she had thought he would say that. "There is one other thing," she said. He waited. "I would like to come back to this market," she said, "after the winter, and the one after that. My work brings me through this region every year." She looked at him, and her voice did not change in register, but something in it was quieter, not formal now, just present. "It would be useful to know a mender in this market who does good work." He understood that she meant more than one thing by this. He was a widower of 11 years, and he had been on the road for most of them, and he was not a young man, and he had learned that when something was offered plainly, it was a discourtesy to pretend it was only one thing. "I'd be glad of that," he said. Something settled between them, unhurried and solid, the way a well-made seam settled when it was properly pressed, without fuss, in the right place. She reached into one of the pouches on her belt and set something on the board between them. It was small, a disc of polished bone, no bigger than a large button, with the crossing stitch pattern worked into its face in what looked like copper wire. 4 threads crossed, the exact pattern she had shown him on the scrap cloth. "That's a teaching token," she said. "In the Stoneback clan, when a skill is passed on, the one who learns it carries one of these. It says you were taught this stitch honestly." She paused. "The clan will know what it means when they bring you their work." He picked it up. It was warm from her pouch, lighter than it looked, and the stitching worked into it was fine enough that he could not see the individual threads without putting it to the light. He set it on the board in front of him, beside his needles. "Thank you," he said. "Thank you," she said. Behind her, the procession began to ease, not leaving, but dispersing into the market in the natural way of people who had somewhere to be and things to look at. Within a few minutes the market was simply the market again, except that it had 47 new people in it, moving through the stalls with the purposefulness of experienced market-goers, and the stall keepers were, one by one, at different speeds, with different degrees of self-consciousness, reopening their canvas flaps and returning to their positions. The apple seller came and stood at the edge of Corwin's stall. "I wonder," he said, in the voice of a man who has made a decision to say something difficult, "if you might have a word with her, on my behalf. I didn't behave well 3 mornings ago." Corwin considered this. "She's over by the herb stall," he said. "Rudwick's going to hear some things about his yarrow. You could go speak to her yourself." The apple seller looked at the herb stall, where Marath was in what appeared to be a calm but unambiguous professional conversation with Rudwick, who looked as though he was learning several things he would have preferred not to know. "I could do that," the apple seller said and went. Corwin watched him go. Then he picked up the teaching token and turned it over in his hand, the polished bone, the fine copper work, the crossing stitch in its clean 4-fold pattern. He set it down beside his needles and looked at it for a moment. He thought about invisible mending, the kind used in ceremonial dress, which he had never seen a market tailor know. He thought about a week to learn the clan knot joins, and what a generation's worth of hold meant in a well-made garment. He thought about a winter camp with good shelter and a proper workspace, and 47 people's worth of work, and a head healer who ran her thumb along repair seems to test them, and said exactly what she meant, and had decided, at some point on the road between Cresthaloe and Milford, that simple honesty was worth seeking out. He began packing down his stall. Not fully, he had 2 more hours before the 3rd bell, but he took down the blue wool bolt and rolled it carefully. He wrapped his needles in their oilcloth sleeve. He put the spools in their traveling box in their proper color order, the way he always did when a market was ending, which was the way Elsa had shown him because she said that how you packed up was how you'd find things when you needed them next. He thought she would have liked Marath, with her direct eyes and her professional attention, and the way she ran her thumb along a seam. He thought Marath would have liked her. The 3rd bell rang, and the market began to close around him, the sounds of canvas being unfastened and goods being wrapped, the shuffle of feet, and the low negotiation of last-minute sales. A few of the Stoneback clan came to his stall in 1s and 2s as the market wound down, bringing pieces of work. A long vest with the side seams beginning to separate. A pair of heavy trousers with a frayed knee. A belt pouch with a broken clasp that was, strictly speaking, not fabric work at all, but he looked at it and saw how to fix it and said so, and the woman who brought it looked at him with a calm curiosity, and then at the teaching token on his board and nodded as though something had been confirmed. He served each piece, looked at it properly, told the owner what the repair required and what it would cost. He answered 3 questions about the clan knot join, which he did not yet know, by saying honestly that he did not yet know it but expected to by the end of the month, and 2 of the 3 people seemed to find this reasonable and left their work anyway. The third one, a broad-shouldered woman with close-cropped braids and the hands of someone who worked with rope or leather, looked at the teaching token on his board for a long moment, then at him, and said something in the clan tongue to the person beside her. The other woman replied. The broad-shouldered one looked back at Corwin. "She says Marath gave you a first-level token," she said, in the common tongue. "I believe so," he said. "She taught me the crossing stitch yesterday." The broad-shouldered woman looked at the board. "She doesn't give those often," she said. "I'll try to be worth it," he said. A pause. Then she set her work on the board, a heavy travel pack with the main strap buckle stitching almost fully gone. "This needs the double lock stitch," she said. "Not the crossing, different." "Show me," he said, and handed her a threaded needle and a scrap of canvas, and she looked at him for a moment as though this was not the answer she had expected, and then she sat on the stool behind the board and showed him. He watched her hands the way he had watched Marath's hands the day before, with the full, open attention of someone who understood that a technique shown once slowly was a gift worth receiving properly. When the last of them had gone and the market was quiet and cold in the late afternoon, Marath came back to the stall. She was still wearing the cloak. She had a piece of paper in her hand, which she set on the board between them, a map, hand-drawn, showing the road north from Milford to a set of landmarks he did not recognize. "The winter camp," she said. "We'll be moving in 4 days. This will get you there." He looked at the map. The drawing was careful and clear, distances marked, a set of stoneback symbol at the final landmark that he did not know but thought he might be able to ask about. "What's this mark?" he said, pointing. "Stoneback oak," she said. "There's one at the camp entrance. You won't mistake it, they're 3 times the height of any other oak in the valley." He nodded. She did not move to leave. She stood at the board in the way she sometimes stood, without urgency, comfortable in the present moment. "There's something I want to ask you," she said. "Go ahead," he said. "Your wagon," she said, "the workspace inside it. Is there room for 2 people to work?" He thought about the wagon's interior, the long work table along the left side, the shelves above it, the cot at the back, the chair he sat in on evenings when he was reading or doing fine work by lantern light. It was a working space, organized around one person's rhythms and one person's needs, the way a space became when you lived alone in it long enough. 2 people would require a rearrangement. The shelves would want reorganizing. The second work table would go on the right side, which meant the storage crates would need to move under the cot, and some things he kept under the cot would need to go elsewhere. He could see it actually, fairly clearly. The right side had always been slightly underused. He had known this in the way you know a thing without saying it, the way you know a room has more space in it than you're using. The chair was, if he was being accurate, the only extra seat in the space. "There's a second chair in the storage box," he said, "under the cot. It comes out for market mornings." She looked at him. "Clan healers who travel carry their own table," she said. "It folds." "Then there'd be room," he said. A pause, not a silence, a pause, which is a different thing, because a pause has something in it. "When I travel in the spring," she said, "I come back through Milford, after the winter grounds. I'm usually here for the spring market," he said. "I know," she said. He looked at her. She was looking at him with that full, even attention, and in the cold afternoon light the green of her cloak was the color of deep forest in the hour before the sun fully sets, and the copper cord he had reset lay perfectly along the hem, and the teaching token sat between his needles on the board. And Corwin Aldred had the very clear sense of a man who had been carefully packing down one part of his life for 11 years and had, without planning it, found himself at the start of a different kind of road. "The Bram woman," he said, "on the hill road for the Yarrow." "I found her this afternoon," Marath said. "Her feverfew is excellent." "I told you," he said. "You did," she said. She folded the edge of the cloak back over her arm, settling it for the walk back to the clan's camp, and she picked up the small piece of work she had set on the edge of the board, a belt that needed a buckle restitched, and she met his eyes once more. 4 days, she said. I'll be there, he said. She walked back out through the north gate, and the evening came down cold and clean around the empty market, and Corwin finished packing his stall and stood for a moment with his hand on the wagon's side panel, looking at the pale sky above the road that ran north. He put the teaching token in his vest pocket, where he would feel it against his chest. He made sure the cot was properly made, and the second chair was accessible beneath it. He moved the storage crates from under the cot to the left corner, behind the shelf of thread spools, and the space they left opened up the right side of the wagon in a way that, once he saw it, seemed obvious. He stood in the wagon's interior for a moment and looked at it properly, the way he looked at a garment he was about to alter, seeing not what it was but what it could be, and the steps between the two. A folding table on the right side, the second chair. Her herb pouches would need somewhere to hang. He had 3 hooks on the right wall, currently holding spare bolts of oilcloth. He moved the oilcloth to the crate he'd just freed up. The hooks were good ones, iron with broad heads. They would hold a healer's pouches without difficulty. He checked that he had sufficient waxed silk in the copper color, because the clan had 47 people worth of dress, and he had a feeling copper thread was going to see heavy use this winter. He counted his needles, all 12 of them, and found 2 that wanted resharpening and sharpened them against the whetstone he kept on the shelf beside the chalk. He checked his supply of the medium-weight beeswax and found it sufficient. He counted the spools of the heavy canvas thread, the kind needed for pack straps and belt stitching, and found he would need more before the month was out. He wrote it in his supply ledger. Then he sat in his chair in the back of the wagon with the lantern and the scrap cloth and worked the crossing stitch again and again, until he could do it in the dark without thinking. 4 threads, crossed, twice through the back layer, the way she had shown him. And then he worked it faster, and then he varied it, adding a 5th thread the way you might when the fabric was heavier. And he thought with the particular feeling of a craftsman who has just been given something genuinely new to learn. That there was a great deal more to know. He thought about the double-lock stitch that the broad-shouldered woman had shown him at the end of the day, different from the crossing, used for load-bearing joins where the pull came from 2 directions at once. He worked out what he'd understood from her demonstration on the scrap cloth, slowly at first, then with growing confidence. He didn't have it yet. There was something in the second pass that he was doing slightly wrong, a tension issue he couldn't fully resolve without seeing it again, but he had the shape of it. He noted it in his work journal, the double-lock load-bearing second pass ask at camp. He slept well. In the morning he was up before dawn, as he always was, and the road north was pale and straight in the earliest light, and in 4 days he would follow it to a camp where there was work worth doing and skills worth learning, and a second chair folded into a table that traveled with its owner. And a head healer of the Stoneback clan who ran her thumb along seems to test them, and said exactly what she meant, and had walked into a crossroads market in a road-worn coat with a torn shoulder seam, and had walked out 4 days later in her full regalia, with the copper cord lying true along the hem of her cloak, and the mending visible as an honor mark. Corwin Aldred packed his wagon and pulled the canvas tight against the morning cold, and the lantern at the front swayed in the small wind, and the road north went on ahead of him, and for the first time in 11 years, the long miles felt like something other than the space between one market and the next. They felt like somewhere he was going.